Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ever had one of those conversations you walk away from and you just feel like all the energy's been sucked right out of you?
Ugh, yeah,
Just
totally.
totally drained, like emotionally, like your batteries need recharging.
I know exactly what you mean.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving deep into today. The psychology behind those relationships, why they make us feel that way, and how to deal with those energy zapping interactions.
Fascinating stuff. The idea that we can choose who we let into our lives and kind of curate our relationships for our well-being.
Exactly. And there was this article I was reading, and it really hit on that. Like, how important it is to be mindful of who we spend time with, for our own mental and emotional health.
Oh, absolutely. It's like tending a garden.
The garden.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you wouldn't plant poisonous flowers that just drain the life out of everything else,
Right.
right? Some people can be kind of like those poisonous flowers, and this article I found actually digs into 5 specific personality types that wise individuals often choose to avoid. It calls them poisonous flowers.
Okay, so let's unpack these poisonous flowers. First on the list, the emotional vampire.
Oh, yeah.
Now, am I picturing someone literally in a Dracula cape? Or is it a bit more subtle than that?
Way more subtle. Think of it like this. Someone who needs to be the center of attention all the time constantly needs validation and support.
Okay.
They'll call you up nonstop to vent about their problems, but when it's your turn, they're not really there for you.
Oh, I know exactly the type. Always running on empty and needing to, siphon energy from others to recharge.
Exactly. And that's why you end up feeling so drained after interacting with them. It's all about them,
It's like they suck the joy right out of you.
literally. And that brings us to the next type, which can also leave you feeling drained in a different way. The constant critic. Ever met one of those?
Oh, I think we've all encountered one at
Oh,
some point.
oh, for sure. It's that person who always finds something to criticize no matter what you do. They try to disguise it as helpful feedback, but it just feels like an attack.
Oh, yeah. I'd had a coworker once, total constant critic. Every single project, she'd find something to nitpick. I was so proud of this one presentation I put together, and she just ripped it apart.
It's interesting, though. The article suggests that constant critics are often projecting their own insecurities onto others. Like maybe they're struggling with self-doubt or fear of failure, so they try to bring others down to their level.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. It's like they're trying to dim your light because they're afraid of their own shadow.
Powerful imagery, right? It really highlights how sometimes people's behavior has way more to do with their own internal struggles than anything we've done.
So we've got the emotional vampire, the constant critic.
Hmm.
Who else is lurking in this garden, waiting to drain our energy?
Well, how about the gossips? Always thriving on drama, spreading rumors.
Ooh, gossips, you said.
Yeah, the ones always whispering in corners, sharing secrets. The article really stresses how important it is to be careful about the information we consume and the conversations we take part in. Because, gossip can really hurt people.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like a game of telephone.
Exactly. The message gets distorted with each retelling, and before you know it, a tiny misunderstanding turns into a huge drama.
So true. All right, so we've got the emotional vampires, the constant critics, the gossips. Who else made the list?
All right, get ready for this one. The narcissist.
Oh, I feel like we all know a few of those.
I'm sure we do. At first, they might seem really charming, charismatic even.
Oh, yeah, like the life of the party,
Yeah.
always the center of attention.
Exactly. But under the surface, there's a huge sense of self-importance and a desperate need for admiration. They lack empathy and often use people to get what they want.
Exhausting. So it's always all about them.
Pretty much. Narcissists can be really manipulative, and you often end up feeling used and drained.
Okay, so emotional vampires, constant critics, gossips, and narcissists. That's quite a crew. Who else is on the list?
This last one might surprise you. The victim.
The victim.
Hmm.
Really, I mean, I get not wanting to be around someone who's always complaining, but isn't it important to be compassionate?
Of course, empathy is important, but there's a big difference between someone who's genuinely going through a tough time and someone who's constantly playing the victim, as the article points out.
Okay, I'm curious. What's the difference?
While someone who's genuinely struggling might reach out for support, want to find solutions, they actually want to overcome their challenges,
Hmm.
but a chronic victim kind of seems to enjoy their misfortunes. They constantly complain, but they don't actually want to change anything.
I I see. So it's about recognizing if someone is truly seeking support or if they're just seeking attention and validation.
Exactly. And the article emphasizes that it's okay to set boundaries with chronic victims. You don't have to get pulled into their negativity. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is encourage them to take responsibility for their own well-being.
Wow, this is all so insightful. 5 distinct personality types: emotional vampires, constant critics, gossips, narcissists, and chronic victims.
Quite the lineup. But before we jump into what we can do about these energy drainers, I have a little story from the article that really resonated with me. It's about the author's own experience with a constant critic and just shows the emotional toll those types of relationships can take.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. Now I'm really curious. But for now, listeners, I have a challenge for you. Think back to a recent interaction that left you feeling drained. Can you spot any of these personality types? What were they doing that contributed to that feeling? We'll dive deeper into these questions and talk about strategies for dealing with these tricky personalities in part 2.
All right, so that story I mentioned about the author and the constant critic.
Yeah, you left us hanging. What happened?
Well, they were really close with this person, and the criticism was just constant. At first, it was subtle, backhanded compliments here and there, dismissive remarks.
Ugh, I hate
But
that.
over time, it really started to wear the author down, like chipped away at their self-esteem.
That's awful. It's
Yeah.
crazy how those little things can build up and affect you.
I know, right? And what struck me was that the author just brushed it off at first. Like, oh, they're just being honest, or they mean well.
Yeah, I've totally been there.
But honestly, constant criticism, even if it's supposed to be helpful, can be so damaging.
So what did the author do?
It took a lot of courage, but they realized they deserved to be in relationships where they felt valued and supported. They started setting boundaries, speaking up for themselves,
Good for them.
and eventually they actually distanced themselves from that person.
Wow, that must have been tough. But it's a good reminder that sometimes we need to prioritize our own well-being, even if it means making hard choices.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
not selfish to protect yourself and surround yourself with people who lift you up, not tear you down.
So true. Okay, so we've talked about the types of people to maybe steer clear of, but what about the flip side? How do we attract those good relationships, the ones that give us energy?
Right, the article talks about that too. It's just as important. It goes back to the garden analogy. If you want a thriving garden, you have to plant those positive seeds, nurture the relationships that bring you joy.
Okay, I love that. So how do we do that? Just like be a good person.
Well, yeah, that's a good start. But the article suggests being more intentional about the energy we bring to our interactions. Like, are we present? Are we really listening? Offering genuine support?
Those are good points. It's easy to get caught up in our own stuff and forget to really connect.
Totally. And even the smallest things can make a difference. A kind word, a thoughtful gesture, just listening without judgment. It all helps nurture those positive connections.
So being mindful of our own behavior is a big part of it. But how do we actually find those positive people to connect with in the first place?
Right. If only there was a magic formula. The article suggests being open to new experiences. Maybe joining a club or group that interests you, volunteering, even just striking up conversations with people you meet.
I love those ideas, just putting yourself out there, right?
Exactly. And remember, those positive relationships are a two-way street. You want to be surrounded by supportive people, but you also have to be that kind of person for others.
Makes sense. It's like being the friend you wish you had.
Exactly. It's about giving back and contributing to those positive vibes.
This is all so helpful. I'm already thinking about how to apply this to my own life. But what about those relationships you can't just walk away from, like family or coworkers who might have some of those energy-draining traits?
That's the tough one, and it's something we'll dig into in the next part of this deep dive. We'll talk about those trickier dynamics and how to navigate them with grace and confidence, so stay tuned.
Okay, so let's tackle those trickier relationships, the ones we can't just avoid, like family or coworkers. Did you have a chance to think about a recent interaction that left you feeling drained, like we've talked about?
It's definitely something a lot of people face. We don't always get to choose who we interact with, especially with family or at work, but we can choose how we react, which is good news.
So it's less about cutting people out completely and more about protecting our own energy, right?
Exactly. We can't control how other people act, only our own reactions.
Okay, that makes sense, but how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
Especially when you can't just walk away or unfriend someone.
It's definitely trickier. The key is to manage our own reactions and set boundaries instead of trying to change the other person.
So boundaries are key.
Mm.
But what does that look like in those unavoidable relationships?
Let's say you have a coworker who's a total gossip, always trying to drag you into drama. Instead of getting sucked in, you can politely excuse yourself.
Okay, yeah.
You could say something like, "Oh, I need to catch up on some emails," or "I got to focus on this project right now."
I see. So you're not being confrontational, but you're setting a limit.
Right. You're basically saying, "This isn't good for me." And you can use that with other personality types too. Like with the constant critic, instead of getting defensive, you can just acknowledge their feedback without taking it personally.
Hmm.
Like, "Thanks for your perspective," or "I'll keep that in mind."
That's a good one. You're acknowledging them, but not letting them drag you down.
Exactly. You're not letting their negativity affect how you see yourself.
This is great stuff. But what about when you can't escape a conversation, like at a family dinner or a work meeting?
Those can be tough. One thing you can try is limiting your exposure. If
Mm.
you know an event might be stressful, maybe don't stay as long.
So get in and get out, minimize the damage.
Exactly. Or have an exit strategy ready. If a conversation starts going south, have an excuse to politely leave.
Oh, you like that?
Like, I need to make a quick call, or I need to grab something from the kitchen.
That's smart. You can get out gracefully without making a big deal about it.
It's all about being proactive and taking care of yourself. And sometimes it might even help to prepare some responses beforehand, especially if you know certain people tend to push your buttons.
That's a great tip. Have those responses ready to go, like a mental shield.
Exactly. Be prepared and have a plan.
This is so helpful. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to deal with these situations. You mentioned earlier that we can't control others, only our own reactions. That's such an important point.
It really is. And sometimes it's the hardest part, right? We wish people would just change, but we can't make them. All we can do is change how we deal with it.
I think that's where those boundaries are so crucial. You're not trying to control them, you're creating a safe space for yourself.
Exactly. It's all about protecting your energy. And sometimes that might mean having a tough conversation or even limiting contact.
It's not always easy, but it's important for our own happiness.
Absolutely. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's actually a form of self-care. It's about recognizing your worth and not letting yourself be drained.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. We've talked about identifying those energy-draining personalities and focusing on building positive relationships.
It's about finding that balance,
Uh,
weeding out the toxic and planting the good stuff.
so well said. And even though the article we talked about focused on women, I think this applies to everyone. We all deserve to be in relationships that make us feel good.
I totally agree. It's a basic human need to feel connected and supported.
So the big takeaway here is being careful about who we spend time with is really important. Recognizing those negative patterns and setting healthy boundaries is how we take care of ourselves. And it's never too late to start. Even small changes can make a difference.
Absolutely. As you go through your week, pay attention to how different people make you feel. Notice who gives you energy and who drains you. Let that guide you as you build a more positive and supportive circle of people around you.
What a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into relationships. Until next time, take care, everyone.